Good afternoon and welcome to today's conversation. I'm Devyani Saltzman, the Director of Public Programming, and very excited to kick off a partnership with the Toronto International Festival of Authors and today's conversation with Roland Gulliver, Director of TIFA, and the amazing, incomparable Ian Rankin. I am a big fan. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge, even in the virtual space where we are, the AGO and all cultural institutions in Toronto, institutions as a whole, operate on the territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. The Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Belt Covenant, is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy to peaceably care for the land around the Great Lakes, which is also governed by a treaty between the Mississaugas of the Credit and the federal government. So acknowledging that we are operating in that space. TIFA and AGO are very happy to come together for a series of conversations called Downtime with writers and artists on boredom, distraction, escapism, and finding creativity in the lockdown. And for our first conversation, I'm very happy to hand this over to Roland Gulliver, the Director of TIFA, speaking to us from Scotland, but in Toronto in spirit, and Ian Rankin, best-selling author who needs no introduction. Enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Devyani, and thank you to the Art Gallery of Ontario for all their help and support in making this partnership work. I'm very excited to be here, very excited to be in this new digital space. I'm delighted to introduce Ian Rankin, an author of many novels. I counted 22 rebus novels, according to the internet, plays, radio, television. It's an incredible amount of work, an incredible writer who has given so much to both the Scottish literary community, but also to the international literary community. His novels have been translated into 22 languages. And now working at alphabeticizing those 22 languages. And I've known Ian for over a decade, who he has given so much to literature and to literary communities, and delighted that he's here to talk with us about these strange times that we're all kind of navigating our way through and trying to find ways to survive and thrive and be creative. So hello, Ian. Can you just tell us where you're speaking to us from?
Yeah, Roland, I'm in Edinburgh. I'm in a place called Quartermile, which used to be the main infirmary. It's now been repurposed for housing. And I've got a little one-bedroom flat, which has become my office. So I'm sitting in the living room, which is my office space, and the next room over, which is the bedroom, is now my listening room with all my LPs and hi-fi in it. And I'm pretty happy here. I mean, it's small, but I like it a lot. It suits me down to the ground. It's not where I would have been, because at the beginning of lockdown, I was finishing a book, and usually I would go to my home in Cromarty, which is up on the northeast coast of Scotland beyond Inverness. There's a little fishing town there. And I've got a house on the front that has no phone signal and no TV. And that's where I normally go to begin and finish my books. Well, this time I couldn't. We're not allowed to travel those kinds of distances. We're not supposed to travel those kinds of distances, not even authors. So I was stuck in Edinburgh, and I was a little bit worried that I wouldn't be able to finish the book, but I finished it ahead of schedule. And I've happily been writing away on other projects ever since.
So have you, in terms of, because you obviously started writing your new novel, A Song for the Dark Times, before Christmas, and then you were in the process of finishing. So are you in a space where you're in between a book that began and waiting for it to come out? Are you finding that you're still carrying that book through that journey, or are you finding having to find different ways to be creative?
Well, there are various versions of this book. There's the book that you write before you've shown it to anybody. It's your book, it only belongs to you, it doesn't belong to anybody else. And then you make the fateful decision, you have to show it to somebody. And in my case, that's my wife and my agent and my editor. And they both then send me feedback on the book. So by this time it has ceased to be my book. It is now a shared artifact, and it is also not the perfect novel I had imagined it to be. It's a novel with mistakes and holes in it and things that people can't quite make sense of. So it gets another version, another polish, and maybe a polish after that. And at the moment, having gone through that and got the thumbs up from everybody, it's now being typeset, and then it'll be proofread. So typeset means it'll look like a finished book, and it'll be proofread by someone who's looking for tiny, tiny mistakes, things that aren't quite right. And at that stage, I can still fix it. Soon after that, it is unfixable. It's going to be printed and bound and out into the world. So it's in limbo at the moment. Very few people have read it. Those who've read it have given me nice feedback on it, but it's still very much a secret project. And if I want, I can still change it. In my contract, it says that up to and including the proofing stage, I can change 10% of the book without having to pay any money to the publisher.
And do you feel that urge to want to change it to?
There comes a point where it's just got to go.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I've said it before, but I've got a quote that's just posted up here on the side of my desk. Iris Murdoch once said, every novel is the wreckage of a perfect idea. And at some point, you can't do anything about that wreckage. You just got to hand it over and then start a new project, start something else. And the reason that writers keep writing books, it's complex reasons. One is that we enjoy the process. One is that it's our way of communicating with the world and making sense of the world. But also, we have failed as yet to write the perfect novel. So every novel I publish is a failure. It's not quite the perfect distillation of everything I want to say about the world. So I've got to start again and try again. And as Beckett says, you try again, fail better. And that's what we're all doing. Trying to make sense of the world, failing slightly to make sense of the world completely, and so trying again.
And so in the we all now have these kind of comparators where we talk about, in the normal world, this would have been this, but now we're like this. So in the normal world, you would have been in a kind of place of waiting and almost kind of creatively hanging around for the book to continue its journey. Are you still able to do that, or do you feel you're having to navigate your days differently?
In the normal world, pre-virus, I would have been whizzing around the place, going to lots of festivals. Hey on Why, I was supposed to be doing. A festival in Ireland I was supposed to be doing. In March, I had to cancel a festival in the USA. Various other festivals have come and gone. And because I'm not rushing around the world being a writer, it means I've actually got more time to sit and write. So I've actually accomplished a lot. Introductions to other people's books, working on a stage play with a playwright that I know, writing short stories for people for charity books and such like, coming up with ideas for things, bouncing ideas around for TV. I've just filmed or helped to, well, no, written a 5-minute play for the National Theatre of Scotland, which is basically John Rebus in a time of Corona. And in that 5-minute play, Rebus is being played by Brian Cox, who's an actor I've always wanted to see play Rebus. So it's such a buzz. And that would never have happened without the virus. People are finding, I mean, it might sound callous to say it, but if you're creative, you find ways of being creative no matter what the hell's going on in the world. You know, people were being creative during world wars, famines, the Black Death, you name it. It's how some of us react and try and stabilize ourselves and help others to stabilize as well by turning it into something crafted and something that's going to make sense. Whereas often these days, even sans virus, the real world doesn't seem to make much sense to people. It seems to be very random and crazy, and it seems like we're all stepped through the looking glass into Alice in Wonderland and we cannot step back.
And so you feel that although there was a physical limitation, you've found some creative freedoms, because lots of writers have said they've found this period a phase where they cannot write or they cannot be creative.
I mean, no two writers are ever the same. It's not a science. What I found is I don't have any trouble writing. I mean, I was writing the book quite happily, editing the book quite happily. I've written short stories and stuff, and the playlet, the 5-minute play and stuff, all from scratch since the virus began. What I am finding difficult is reading. When it started, like many other people, I thought, right, this is it. Now I get into War and Peace. Now I get into Dostoevsky. Now I get into Brothers Karamazov, or I don't know, Tolkien or something. All these big fat books that I've not quite read or never quite finished. No, I'm retreating to books I know and love. So at the moment, I'm 7 volumes in. I'm looking because they're up there on the shelf. 7 volumes into Anthony Pole's A Dance to the Music of Time, which I've probably read, all 12 volumes. I've probably read them 6 or 7 times in my life. And here I am reading them again. Because it's a joy to spend time in someone else's universe. And it's a comic universe, and a universe full of extraordinary characters. And it's comforting because I know what's going to happen next.
And so you're not exactly having trouble reading, but you're not reading new. You're kind of retreating into comfort reading.
Yeah, and short books, because the attention span seems to be going. So I like books that have got short chapters, or at least they're quite short themselves. The thought of sitting down to read an 800-page novel is frankly petrifying at the moment. Maybe I'll get around to it eventually. For the first few weeks, it all seemed quite exciting, didn't it? I mean, in some ways, the world changed so drastically. It just changed so drastically. It was like the beginning of 28 Days Later, that zombie film where he wakes up in a hospital in London, walks out, and London is completely empty. And it feels like that walking into the centre of Edinburgh. And for a few days or weeks, I was walking around like a stranger in a strange land, and seeing Edinburgh anew, seeing the city anew, seeing it without traffic, without people, hearing birdsong, which is something you could seldom hear in the centre of Edinburgh, as would be true of the centre of Toronto. Suddenly you're hearing birdsong again, and people are saying, oh, we've got, swans and ducks and things down by the river, we've got otters down by the canal, etc., etc. But after a little while, that palled, and walking past 5-star hotels that are boarded up, walking past pubs that are empty, walking past shops that may never open again, restaurants that may struggle to open again, the realization is dawning that this is something we are really going to struggle to come out of successfully and happily and profitably on the other side.
Yeah, I've been enjoying on your Twitter, when you go out for your daily walk, that you have been taking photos of the empty streets. Is that for your own? Is that to document it yourself? Is it that sense of sharing that with, we all go into digital, but that online community that you talk to as a writer, is that part of?
I used to keep a diary when I was a kid. From the age of 12 until I was in my 30s, I kept a page-a-day diary, which is quite toe-curling. Some of the writing in it is not to be seen by anybody. I think the diaries will be burnt at my death or put in the coffin with me. They're not going anywhere. But that's how I treat Twitter. I think Twitter is almost like a little diary. I can skim back and see what I was doing on any particular day. But it's a diary that allows me to add photographs, allow me to add pictures to the daily experiences. So yes, it's partly for reference. It's partly so I can go back and remind myself by looking at these photos of what the world was like at that time. And perhaps it will be useful for research purposes, although I do not want to add to the slew of virus novels that are going to be coming at us in the next 2 or 3 years. I'm determined not to write one of those. You never know. Maybe I will. It's a great time to do a heist novel. Come on. All these jeweler shops sitting empty, banks, come on. 5-star hotels with just one security guard staying all night. No. So the material's there for any writer or artist who wants to use it. But no, Twitter's fun. Writers write in isolation. We spend a great deal of our time in isolation, and Twitter is an outlet. It allows us to communicate to an audience. It allows an audience to communicate with us. It allows me to keep in touch with family and friends. And it gives me news about the world. It's the first place I go to for a kind of daily news briefing, because it seems to get news, unfiltered news, which therefore you can't always trust, but it gets it ahead of the competition.
And so in that terms of documenting and that kind of capturing and you look at an empty hotel and see a heist novel, do you feel, do you feel that anxiety as a writer that you should be capturing and drinking as much as what is happening so that you can then interpret it as a writer? Or are you at the same time going, well, once we get out of this, what kind of novel am I writing? Do I write a novel that skirts around this moment, goes through it, above it?
Well, I'm a great believer in the muse. If the story wants to be told, it'll let you know. You don't need to seek it out. And so it's a bit like osmosis. Anything that any experiences I'm having will be there. I've ingested them, and if I need them at a future date, they're there, but I'm not going to force them out. And I get the feeling that when this is all done and dusted, what the public are going to want are feel-good stories of all stripes. They're going to want feel-good stories in their movies. They're going to want feel-good stories on TV. They're going to want feel-good stories from their books, from their novels. And to be honest with you, that's never quite been my stock in trade, the feel-good story. I'm very much the sort of, the glass is always half empty, especially if I get to it first. And so I don't know if I can satisfy those criteria for feel-good stories. I'm very lucky that the next rebus, the one that comes out in October, was started in September 2019 and is set in the summer of 2019. So it does not have to reference the virus in any way, shape or form. And I'm very pleased about that. The next book I write, if I write another book, whether it will need to include the coronavirus, I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe some mention along the way. If rebus can no longer go to the Oxford Bar because the Oxford Bar has been unable to open, then that's going to have to get a mention at some point.
That's true. And you talked about kind of your comfort reading in terms of things like music, because you're a massive music fan, and as you were alphabeticizing your record collection yesterday, have you fallen back into like comfort music or comfort radio or listening to things rather than having to look and read?
I used to wake up to kind of news radio, and I don't do that anymore. It's too dispiriting. You go to bed and the last thing you heard was people telling you about the virus, and you wake up and the first thing you hear is people telling you about the virus. So I've taken to waking up to Six Music, which is a BBC music channel that does progressive music, new music, or else classical music. It's what I tend to wake up to. Just something to ease me into the day, to tell me there's more to life than this. We will come out the other side, hopefully. In terms of comfort listening, not really. I mean, when I'm writing a book, I've got music playing, and the music center is kind of behind me down there, and it's a CD player, but it's mostly instrumental music because lyrics would interfere with my thought processes. What I'm doing is creating a bubble in the room where the world ceases to exist except for me, the characters, and the story. So it's unobtrusive music. Things like Brian Eno's ambient works are great for that. A little bit of Tangerine Dream from time to time, German prog. What else? Boards of Canada, kind of Scottish electronica band. Film soundtracks, a little bit of jazz maybe, very kind of late night loungy jazz is good. And then when the working day is done and I'm reading, again, I can't really read if there's lots of lyrics going on off to one side. So again, it tends to be instrumental music. But having just, as you say, alphabetized my LP collection very gratifyingly, but my back is now killing me. It's taken me 3 days to do it. I've found lots of albums that I thought, oh yeah, I've not played that in 20 years. I've not played that in 30 years. And it was some surprises were thrown up. The artist or band with the most albums was Frank Zappa. And I wasn't quite expecting that. He had 23 or 24, I think. Stones were up there, but a lot of jazz. Art Pepper and Eddie Harris and Coleman Hawkins had 20 odd albums each. So there's a lot more jazz in that collection than I'd expected, and one classical album. One classical album, which is Mozart's Requiem, purchased after I watched Amadeus.
But you said you listened to classical music. Do you now feel other?
I've got a lot of classical music on CD. The thing about classical music is pops and clicks are irritating. And so I tend not to buy it on vinyl, and never did. When the CD came along, it was a godsend for classical music. And so I do have a lot of classical, but it is on CD. And I do like a lot of modern stuff. Arvo Part, or however you may pronounce that, I'm a big fan of his. There's a fair amount of modern classical in there. And it kind of melds then into electronica and a lot of things that bands are doing these days. I mean, a Winged Victory for the Sullen, which is a terrible name for a band, are really modern classical, although that's not how they are marketed, but that's how they sound to me. And I often drop off at night to the sounds of them playing on my phone and wake up in the morning and it's still playing, which is great.
And I guess in terms of, because I know both kind of buying records and going to gigs and concerts were something that you love to do. I can kind of assume that you missed that. Have you explored experiencing those, the kind of online versions of those?
Well, again, I mean, last night, my wife and I watched Barbershop Chronicles, which is a National Theatre production that was on their YouTube channel.
Hmm.
She'd actually seen it at the theatre. It was in Edinburgh a few months ago, I think, and she went and saw it, but I didn't. So we sat down and watched it. These streaming plays that they're doing are fantastic. There are streaming gallery exhibitions, which I think are fantastic. It's not the same. It can't ever replicate the experience of being in a live theatre or a live gig, live music, concert hall, whatever. It's close, but it's no cigar. But I'm afraid that might be what the theatre has to do in the short term, especially the theatre. I mean, social distancing is anathema to a theatre or a music gig where you want people to be close together and therefore responding as one to what's happening on the stage. And you can't reproduce that on a screen, but that'll be the way that if they want to monetize it, if they want to make some money for the actors and the performers, they're going to have to do it. They're going to have plays that are put on specifically for an audience at home. And the ones they've been putting on have been getting huge audiences. I mean, a play that would be seen by 1,500, 2,000 people a night, when they put it on a YouTube channel, is seen by hundreds of thousands of people all around the world. So if you can turn that into money, whether it's by donations or actually making people pay before they watch, then suddenly people can start to make money from their work, and we will start to get creative work, people doing creative work again.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, you've got it as well. You've got it with book festivals.
That's true.
Can you imagine going along to a book festival? It's fine for the two people on a stage who might be 2 meters apart, the interviewer and the author. But in the audience, are you going to have people 2 meters apart? That is going to really cut into your revenue. And again, you can do it online. You can have an online book festival. We're doing one right here, but it's not quite the same thing. And people can't ask questions in the same way. And if you're the author, you cannot sell unsigned books at the end.
Yes,
which is a big part of it for a lot of writers.
Yeah. I know, and I think one of the things that all live events are trying to work out is how do you make it work? How do you make it happen? How do you then?
We need lots and lots and lots of Peggy Atwood's long pen.
Yes,
reproduced. Remember the long pen? Peggy Atwood, Margaret Atwood, demonstrated at the Edinburgh Book Festival one year and was signing books from a distance. It didn't work hugely well that first time. I think there were some teething problems.
Yeah, but that was about 8 years ago.
I know, it's still not the same, right? You're sitting there in a room and somebody's signing a book, but they're 3,000 miles away. No, you want to pick book and go, I was there when they signed it. I mean, I've got lots of signed books in this room. Just yesterday, I came across a paperback that I hadn't realised was signed. And again, I'm pretty sure it was signed at the Edinburgh Book Festival. D.M. Thomas's The White Hotel. And I must have taken my King Penguin paperback along to D.M. Thomas's event. And it was 1985 because he put the date on it and he signed the book. Now, obviously, I was thinking of selling that on because it isn't signed to Ian Rankin. It's just his signature and the date. And this was in the days before eBay, by the way. But yeah, I just came across that and I couldn't believe that that I'd forgotten that I'd been at that event. And I'd forgotten that he'd signed the book for me.
In true literary event style, I've just had a message saying that people can ask questions via the question and Q&A button at the bottom of their Zoom screen. So if they ask a question, we
can see it and we can answer.
Yeah. We haven't quite got a long pen to enable people to sign. Although, because I think that was about 10 years ago. So that technology was relatively high tech. And given where we are now, there might be ways that could make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are ways you can. I mean, if you buy an LP or something from a band from their website, it'll be signed when it comes to you. So there's nothing to stop the author signing lots of pages of books, and then people requesting those books after the festival and then being sent to them.
Yeah,
I don't know. I honestly don't. That's up to people like you to decide. That's not.
We are working on plans for that. Do you think? Now, because obviously you talked about the fact that you had lots of plans to go do events, be at festivals, but by not doing that, you found some new space to be. I realized actually by asking this question, I'm almost like shooting myself in the foot. Would you change how you kind of are as a writer once we come out of this and once movement starts? Would you want to travel again, or would you look at actually saying, well, I'll appear on a screen for your Zoom event?
I think touring is going to be difficult in the future for a while. Things like traveling through airports, it's going to take more time to travel through airports. My US tours, it's usually 14 cities in 14 days, and that means 14 flights. You know, the hassle of doing that, if it's going to take you 4 hours to get through an airport, the stress of doing it, you'd spend more time in the airport than you would actually on the ground at the events and stuff. So that may have to change. I don't know. Might have to slimline festivals down so there's less travel involved in them. I mean, I'm hoping that by October things might be a little bit looser, because when the new book comes out, I'm due to do a UK tour, a Canadian tour, a US tour. Whether those will happen in a physical form or not, I've got no idea. And I'm just hoping for the best, and nobody really knows yet. Nobody really knows. Oh,
and I think we have some quick, yes.
Does Ian have a favourite Canadian author other than Atwood? Does Ian have a favourite Canadian author other than Atwood? I'm glad you took Peggy out of the equation there. I love Peter Robinson. I mean, he's Anglo-Canadian. He lives most of his time in Canada, I think, still. I think his books are great. Oh my God, Louise Penny, another terrific Canadian crime writer. Kathy Rice, who kind of bounces between the States and Canada, but I think has been a Canadian writer, really. I'm going to miss people out, and they're going to punch me in the face next time I see them. Who else? I mean, I used to love Mordecai Richler's books. Yeah, lots. Brian Moore, was Brian Moore Canadian? I mean, he was kind of Irish Canadian. I think he was Canadian rather than American, wasn't he? I used to love his books. I remember seeing him in Edinburgh a long time ago. I think I got a book signed. I must go and check it out. Who would you choose to be in your quarantine house? Namely, who would you hypothetically want to live with during a lockdown? Up to 5 others. What is the importance of the physical environment and how this resonates with the creative process? Wow. Well, I'm one of these writers who cannot write on the move. Now, if you talk to Alexander McCall Smith, he writes everywhere. Planes, trains, automobiles, hotel rooms, balconies, the toilet. You name it, he's writing. That's how he can produce 12 books a year. I've got to be in a space I'm familiar with. I've got to be in my office, basically. And I've got to feel comfortable, which is why I'm always surrounded by books that are kind of textbooks and books that I know well, music that I know well that I can play, a kettle, maybe some chocolate bars. In fact, here, because I've got a kitchen, I've actually got a fully working kitchen. So I've got a toaster and I've got a fridge. I've never used the cooker, but I can make toast if I want to, and I can make cups of tea and coffee, like the cup of tea in my Alex Harvey mug. So in my quarantine house, who would I have? I'd probably have Felix from The Apartment. Remember the film The Apartment? Jack Lemmon played Felix. And he's brilliant because he's always making food. He's always tidying up. He's very neat. And at the end of the day, you could just gimp him into a cupboard and lock the cupboard and relax for a while. Let him out next morning, he'll make you your breakfast and tidy up. How great would that be? I'd want some fun people. I'd probably have Julie Cooper. I was just writing a letter to Julie Cooper today. She's a friend of mine, and I've not seen her for maybe 10 or 12 years. We communicate by old-fashioned letter writing and sending cards to each other. And I just wrote a letter to her today, and she's a hell of a lot of fun. And she's currently, I think, writing a new novel, which is about football. And as a bit of a fan of football, I'd love to talk to her about that. So who else? I mean, dead or alive? I mean, Muriel Spark would be great. Very sparky, very witty, droll. Would probably end up arguing, though. I think she could be quite biting and sarcastic and everything else. So, but I wouldn't mind her. Robert Louis Stevenson, I just really want to ask him what he did with the original manuscript of Jekyll and Hyde. Did he really burn it? Because his partner at the time, Fanny, apparently didn't like it, and he burnt it in the fire. Well, A, did he? I wouldn't do that. Would you do that? I wouldn't do that. And B, what was in it? What was in it that she thought was so shocking, so revelatory, or so nasty that it had to go in the fire? So there's a few to kick off with.
Mike Rebus and Alan Banks ever cooperate in a murder?
Oh. They might. There was a book that came out a few years ago called The Lineup, and in The Lineup, they partnered crime writers to write stories about their 2 main characters. And I was partnered with Peter James. So we had his cop who's in Brighton in the far south of England, and my cop Rebus who operates in Edinburgh. And we found that a plot that would allow the 2 of them to work together. It's one of these things that writers, whenever they get together, always end up talking about. Drunkenly in the bar at literary festivals at midnight. Hey, wouldn't it be great if your character and my character got together and solved the case? And then in the cold light of dawn, we think, oh, it's awfully difficult. It would be really difficult to share the writing duties, to do who decides what happens where. I did once a long time ago offer Rebus to a guy called Alan Grant, who was writing Batman at the time, the Batman comic books. And he's a Scot. He was living not too far from Edinburgh. And I said, if you ever need Batman to come to Edinburgh, please have it that a guy called Rebus is his cop who helps him. And it never happened. So, but it might happen.
That'd be amazing. But it's interesting in terms of, obviously, where literary, and particularly crime characters exist in the same city, and the fact that,
I know,
particularly in Edinburgh and Glasgow, there are a lot of different,
particularly Edinburgh, man, Edinburgh. Yeah. And listen, thank you. I've just noticed what's behind you. 2 really early Ian Rankins there, 2 early Rebuses and very, very old covers. I'm not even sure I've still got those ones. Strip Jack in the Black Book, maybe, I'm not sure.
Yes, indeed. Good spot. There's also a bottle of Rebus 30 at the top.
Is there a Rebus 30 at the top? That's at the top. I've got a bottle of that there as well. Yeah, what we're talking about. Oh yeah, look, I mean, look, Edinburgh, for God's sake, readers are fine with Kate Atkinson's Private Eye working out of the same city as Rebus, which is the same city that Quentin Jordan's cop works out of, etc., etc., etc. They're fine with that. Edinburgh is a small city, but it can contain multitudes. They're their own universes. They never quite meet, you know. But we sometimes, crime writers do often put other crime writers in their books. I mean, we're always mentioning Michael Connolly's got me in one of his books. Sandy McCall-Smith has mentioned me several times. The Rebus books are mentioned in a crime novel I'm reading just now, which isn't published till September, by a TV personality called, I was going to say Matt Osman. It's not Matt Osman, it's Richard Osman. Matt Osman is his brother, who's also got a novel out. So yeah, we're always doing that. We're always doing that. I'm just looking at this question, how involved are you with community of authors in Scotland? Not very. I mean, Kate Atkinson probably lives a mile away from me and I hardly ever see her, but that's because she keeps herself to herself. She comes out when she's got a book published, but otherwise she doesn't tend to go to the same writers' parties and things that I go to.
That's also
Andy McCall-Smith I used to see a lot. I mean, I lived 2 doors away from him until a year ago. So I used to, except he was always traveling. He was always away somewhere. So if I was away, he was in Edinburgh. If I was in Edinburgh, he was away. Irvin Welsh lives in America now, so we don't see Irvin very often. Val McDermott's kind of here. I think she's got a house in Fife as well. I don't know if she's in Fife or Edinburgh most of the time now, because her partner works in Fife. It used to be a community. I mean, there used to be a bunch of us. I'm going back a long time now. Ian Banks, Ken MacLeod, a science fiction novelist, Andy Gregg, poet and novelist, Ron Butlin, Reggie Clare, his wife, who's a poet, Swiss poet. A bunch of us used to get together in the Abbotsford bar and drink and talk about whiskey and talk about books and talk about ridiculous things like which is our favourite Carry On film, or where's the best butchers to buy steak in Edinburgh. I mean, just, you know, a playwright once came along, and I think he was slightly disappointed by the level of intellectual debate that was being had in the Abbotsford. And we would always either start or end the evening with a curry in Ian Banks's favourite curry house. I'm sure you'll have had a curry with Ian Banks in a curry house at some point in your career, Roland, and if not, you've missed a treat.
There is a second part to that question, which is, do you have any advice for writers who are having a hard time getting any writing done?
Well, if you're talking, you're having trouble because of COVID, I mean, just walk away. Don't, if you're not doing it, just don't do it. If you can afford not to do it, don't do it. Wait until the muse returns. Wait until your brain is ready and willing for this stuff to happen. There's an awful lot going on in people's lives just now. Maybe there just isn't room in your life for creative writing. In general, you know, if you're getting stuck, go for a walk. If you're getting stuck, listen to music, pick up a book, do a crossword, switch your brain onto something else, and your brain might decide what it really wants to be doing is writing a book or a story. And through doing a crossword or going for a walk, you may find the inspiration for the story that you now need to write. But don't be hard on yourself. Don't beat yourself up if you can't write at the moment, because a lot of people are finding it really difficult, really difficult. And in general, you know, stick at it. I mean, try and write something, maybe a journal. You know, like I use Twitter as almost as a diary. Maybe keep a journal, maybe keep a diary, and just write a few lines every day about what you've been doing, and that just keeps the muscle going. It keeps the writing muscle going.
2 last questions. One won't be a surprise, one will be. Do you still spend time in the Oxford Bar pre-COVID? I think you managed to go there. Managed to have an alfresco pint there, didn't you, for your birthday? And what is something your fans would be very surprised to learn about you? Yeah,
I mean, I went past the Oxford Bar today, actually. I went for a run and I run into town because town's a lot quieter than the parks near me. And I had to actually take a photograph of the Oxford Bar sign for a project that someone else was doing. They asked me as a favour to take a photograph of the Oxford Bar sign. And while I was down there, I bumped into a couple of guys who drink regularly in the Oxford Bar. So we stood 2 meters apart and had a little chat about it, worried that it may not open again because it's such a small bar that you cannot stay 2 meters away from anybody and still be inside the bar. And in Scotland, you're not allowed to drink outside. So it's not like you can go and stand on the pavement. So yeah, I mean, up until the virus, I was drinking in the Oxford Bar. On my birthday, when I turned 60, I took a glass and a can of beer down to the Oxford Bar, stood outside and drank it, and then walked home again, observing social distancing at all times. So that's that. So yeah, I still do drink there. I get a lot of inspiration from it. What was that last one?
Something your fans would be very surprised to learn about you.
Very surprised. Well, I think I've already admitted to a couple of them today. One, that I'm a big fan of Julie Cooper. It's not just that I'm a fan of her as a person. I actually do like her books. My wife and I were living in the wilds of France when we were, fairly newly married. And one winter, first winter we were there, we were snowed in, and I'd read every book in the house apart from my wife's Julie Cooper collection. So I picked up Riders by Julie Cooper, and I got completely immersed in it. And I swear to God, when I finished the Anthony Paul books, I'm going to Rivals. Rivals is my favorite Julie Cooper. It's about a takeover of a TV station. If you've not read it, it's brilliant. So big fan of Julie Cooper would be one. And the other one is that I go running. I mean, I think a lot of people think I just stand in the pub, getting drunk all the time and thinking dark thoughts. But about, 5-6 years ago, maybe little bit more than that, I started taking up jogging. And I go out with a couple of friends, usually on a Sunday, and we jog 5K, 7K, 8K, wow. And then repair to a cafe where we eat croissants and put it all back on again. But of course, now we can't do that. We can't run together. So what we do is by phone, we can't even run together. So we sort of start at the same time, finish much the same time, and then have a little chat to each other about how the run was for us, but we run different routes. So I'm running through the empty streets of Edinburgh 2 or 3 times a week.
Which is impressive,
Street, George
given how
Street,
hilly it is.
Princess Street Gardens, Grass Market. It's just empty. And no traffic, so you can run on the road, so you are maintaining that 2 meter distance, even if there are pedestrians. So yeah, I run, and I'm a fan of Julie Cooper.
There we go. On those bombshells, we will have to finish. I'd like to say we'd all be repairing to the signing tent but alas, one day soon. Thank you very much, everyone out there, for listening and staying tuned. There'll be more events next Tuesday, 3 more in this series. And actually just a very big thank you to Ian Rankin. His book, A Song for the Dark Times, will be out on the 1st of October, published by Hachette Canada, also Orion in the UK. And hopefully, we will see him very, very soon.
I'm off, guys. Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye.